I think one of the things you don't realize is that people around you are watching you and that you have to step it up.
That's the hard part. I think sometimes when people are, too talented or too smart or too, whatever, good at what they do, they're too in their head also to actually kind of just breathe, let go, and jump.
The business itself will carry so much stress for you that if you're not doing the proper stuff on top of everything else, the stress will take you totally down.
Hey friends, you're tuned in to the Learn or Be Learned podcast, a show where wisdom meets curiosity in order to discover the human experience. I'm your host, Shiva D, and remember, you either learn from or you're learned from. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, welcome back everybody to another great episode. Today I have Carina Gardner, and she has a PhD in design. She is a 7-figure entrepreneur with plenty to share and an author. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about. And I just want to say, Carina, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And before we jump in, I always think it's great for the guest to share a little bit of the backstory, the little bit of the, what's going on and how you got to where you are right now before we start jumping into the questions and, conversation. So
Awesome.
Do you mind sharing?
Yeah. So I did my doctorate, my master's degree, and my bachelor's degree all very young. So I kind of finished my doctorate. I was about 27. Every time I had a degree, I'd have a baby. So I have 3 kids. I have 3 degrees. So kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
But some of it all happened by accident. My undergrad degree is actually in communications with an emphasis in marketing. And I really wanted to get into advertising. But what I found was whoever was in charge of all the visuals was actually the person who made an advertisement look good and could control everything.
Right.
So right then, Adobe had been starting to get a little more successful with design degrees, graphic design degrees. This is the early 2000s. And so I went and decided to do a master's degree in design just to supplement my undergrad degree. Turns out design way more fun than advertising. So I got the master's degree and didn't have a lot left for my doctorate. So I just went ahead and did the doctorate as well. Throughout that time, I taught at the University of Minnesota. I taught at the Arts Institute. My specialty was typography and packaging design. And I really love design. I was doing a lot of freelance work. Decided that I wanted to try to start my own business, which, man, if I knew what I knew now, ignorance is bliss, right?
Right. Yeah.
I made no money the first year. I mean, $300. And I literally, it was like 11 months of like HELL. Like honestly, I had 2 really small children. I wasn't making any money, but I was working my tail off and made $300. And I was like, this is not going to work. I think I have made a really bad mistake. Well, I talked to someone in the industry and they said, maybe you're doing it wrong. Maybe you should try working on someone else's website. So I did. And the first month I was on this other website, I made $300. Second month, I don't remember what I made. But by the third month, I was doing $1,000 a month. I think in that particular site, I was doing like $4,000 a month by the time I had kind of figured out what was going on. And that really kickstarted my career, and it made me learn probably the most important lesson of my business life. And that is, if you have no distribution, you have nothing. Doesn't matter if you have a great product or if you're an amazing designer. If you don't know how to get distribution for a product, then you don't have a business. And 3 years ago, I started my program Design Suite with the whole idea of Carina said, could we create designers who were learning design at the same time teaching them how to do distribution to actually create businesses that could make money? And we started that 3 years ago. I'm currently have owned my business for about 16 years. So I was like a practitioner to educator, which is funny because I started as an educator, then became a practitioner and then an educator. And it just blew up. We didn't realize the market really was desperate for a program like ours. it's just such a crazy little tiny niche, but people literally don't know how to make money in it. And so it was just really cool to start something where we're teaching people how to make real businesses.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that your business blew up in 3 years, which is crazy, right? To see the scale and growth and how fast things can change in your life. And I'm curious because you said the success was really in the educational sector. What is your thoughts on that space, that industry? Is it you see it's growing? Is it very niche specific? That's where the market, or that's where you can hit the market, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot right now in the education space. You see a lot of people doing coaching and starting programs that are not accredited, not through universities. You know, I have a university background, and you're going to see us moving more towards university in our program, because one of the things we're seeing is it's a little bit like the wild, wild west right now. So I've joined a few different programs, and they've all been really good. I really haven't joined anything that has been horrible. But once again, like once in a while, I've bought like a class that was pretty expensive, and I always find a way to get something out of it. But there's no like way to know if what you're buying is going to be really good or not. And I bought a couple of things that was kind of like, I don't know if this was quite worth the price, right? And I say that in all fairness because I have a very expensive program. We akin ourselves to a college program,
Right.
but you know, unless you like, you hear me talk and I tell you exactly like, our courses are 15 weeks and semester long, and our courses are, you know, we do all of these things.
Yeah.
And a lot of that just comes from my background between academics and a business person. I've kind of tried to merge those together to be like an academic vocational program. But we are in a really weird spot. I think that things are going to change. I think there's a lot of money to be made, but I also think there's a lot of education that's not as good out there as you would think it should be.
Right. I actually had the exact same thought just the other day, was about the education space in my opinion, I see it being a great realm for people, especially because of the tuition prices today and how you can get specialized knowledge in what you want. And although I would say, college is great for its other purposes, sometimes, it's a luxury. It is really what it is at this point of how expensive it is. And I think, these specific skills you can learn online now, even just free on YouTube, is incredible, let alone from people across the world that are, getting their mastery in it, is great. It's a great opportunity. But I had the exact same thought, which is there's no regulation, so you don't know whose course is actually great. Everybody can get a 5-star review for their course. Somebody's willing to give it out. So it's like you don't really know where to begin unless you hear it from somebody else, or you just take the chance and spend the money anyways. But so what do you think for people that, going forward, because you said this is kind of the wild, wild west here, going forward, how can they differentiate themselves to, gain a stranger's trust? Maybe the option is credibility through other channels, so like free YouTube or something.
Possibly. I think social media is really difficult though, because I mean, we don't have a huge following. We don't have to have a pretty big business, because social media doesn't drive good businesses, right? You'll see like, I have friends who have 1,000 people following them. They have $11 million companies. You know what I mean? Like social media doesn't drive it.
Right.
I think that the ones that are really providing value, their followings will grow, but also the people that they're really providing value to will enjoy it and be able to tell you. I can't tell you exactly. We have a secret that we'll be able to share in a little bit, and I don't know when this is coming out, but we are actually going to make changes within our own program and be looking for other ways to differentiate, because I think when the only regulation system right now is the accreditation bureaus, that's something that those that are really looking for the next level might need to be looking at, because otherwise, who's to say that your program is better than so-and-so's program, right?
Right.
So I think it's going to be an interesting thing. I think a lot of it is personality based. You know, people come into my program because they believe me, right? If I'm talking to them and I have the credentials and I'm telling them this is what we do and this is how we do it, then they're coming because they like what I'm doing in this space. That is the one beautiful thing I think about allowing so many people to educate, is because you can see, you know, one person is going to fit better than another person, right? Like you want to choose who's going to fit best with you versus
Right.
in a university, maybe you're stuck with a professor that you're not in love with, right?
Right.
For the thing that you're doing.
Right. Or have to take them because they're the only one or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you mentioned that when you were starting this business and working, you weren't making anything, or was that the other business?
Oh my gosh. Well, my first business that I started 16 years ago. Yeah. I made $300 the first year. That's a lie. The first 11 months. Then I made $300 the very first month I moved to another website and figured out what I was doing. From there, I would say I hit three figures. It took me about six figures, and it took me about 4 years to get there. From there, it was multiple six figures, and most designers coming out of college make about $50,000 a year, $55,000 a year is a pretty typical salary for a graphic designer. So the fact that in 3 or 4 years, I was able to quadruple that amount pretty easily on my own didn't have anything to do with having a doctorate. Had everything to do with understanding business and starting to realize like the business practices that I need to take hold of in order to start a business. Now, 3 years ago when I started the design program, which I think the only reason it worked the way it did and why it blew up the way it did is because of the 13 years before that I spent as a practitioner, right? Like no one, I don't think anyone would have believed me except for I said, I'm on these 9 platforms. Look at this. This is what we do. This is how we're doing it. And it's like, people are like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like this is real data. And I think by showing that, that's the only reason my program took off, because I was like, I promise I know what I'm doing. It's not just because I have a doctorate. It's not because I was the creative director of a scrapbooking company, but it's because I really understood the principles of creating a digital based design business. And I think there is something to be said. I see a lot of people, entrepreneurs, like they just try to get started and they're young and they're unexperienced. They haven't done anything. I still think it's important to get going, but there is a lot of power in actually having experience, because the moment you have that experience, people are like, oh, I see what you've done and I see how you're creating this. I think I can do this too. And the cool thing is 3 years in, we have seen it. We have lots of designers who are making money as designers in different fields and aspects. And so now even more, it's really fun to see what all of our designers are doing.
Right. So I've kind of teetered with this as well. When you say experience, in particular, do you just mean just work experience in the realm of which they try to start their business? And how, because it's very fluid, right? How many years do you, so I'm just kind of seeing.
I think you have to have a solid 5 years of experience doing whatever you're doing. I think it's the thing I hate the most that I see very often is people who start businesses to help other business owners when they've never owned another business before. To me, that's like, do not run away as fast as you can, because you're taking money from someone who literally has never run a business on their own. One of my first masterminds I was in that I really loved, I ended up being in it for 3 years. It was very expensive. I couldn't believe I paid for it, but I'm so grateful I did, was someone who owned she owned a dance company, and it was a brick and mortar store. And then she had her online business. And the reason I liked that is because she understood payroll. She understood hiring and firing people. She understood running a business in a brick and mortar location. She understood seasons. And so when I went to her digital business, even though she hadn't been around as long in her digital business and as part of her group, I knew she understood business. And that's really what I was looking for.
And wouldn't you say part of that is just jumping at any point? You're not going to have that much business experience, so you kind of have to just fall a few times and scrape your knees.
I think this Design Suite is my fifth, if not sixth business. So that's the thing that people don't hear. They'll hear multi-million. We're kind of like this secret multi-million-dollar company that just kind of blew out in the middle of nowhere. But it's like, first I owned for 16 years this design business. I also owned a design agency within a creative group that actually did great, but didn't hold on to for a really long time. I owned a physical products company. We did deals with Nordstrom, Peak Clothing, museums, 500 independent toy stores. Horrible margins, even though we looked really successful, the margins were the worst. And so it's like, you have to own. I've owned 5 or 6 businesses, and it's like, some have been really successful. Some have been like, meh, so-so. I think there's probably one that was a true failure, and that was one that I had with a partner. I never, ever recommend having a partnership. It's very, very early on. But you almost do have to own a lot of businesses in order to understand business, because it's so much failure. You figure out what payroll really costs you. You figure out what taxes you have to pay. You figure out like how sales really work. It's just really going out of your way to build it out. And, the last one, Design Suite, has been by far the most successful, but it's also on the tails of 4 other businesses and understanding how those work.
Right. So what do you recommend someone who's interested but they're maybe fresh out of college or just, on the younger side and wants to do business? What would be your recommendation based off of the several businesses you've had and everything you've done?
2 things. I think one, you can make a product and just go sell it as hard as you can. Okay. The second thing is go work for someone else and go get on their sales team and see how they sell and figure out how to sell the way they sell. Not all sales methods work. I've been part of a sales group that we just tried a sales method for a year, and it worked, but I didn't love it. It didn't fill me with joy. I didn't like the way it worked, and we just changed it. And that was rough, like changing an entire system that we were previously using. But if you can go work for someone else and get as much experience as you can before you go set out on your own, I think there's a lot of power to that. Either that or just find a product that you want to sell. Go see if you can do some distribution on it. Don't spend lots of time inventing something brand spanking new or all of that good stuff. Like, that is the fun part. It's also the part that will make you go into debt. You will lose money over, and you will lose time all over.
Right. So I'm curious as to, eventually you had this breakthrough company and you started seeing the returns, the fruits of your labor. Now, was there also a breakthrough mindset shift in the same process? And, what did you think differently at that point versus before?
I think, ironically, it was the education piece of digital marketing that opened my mind to education online. I come from a physical bag, have my PhD from the University of Minnesota. I really hadn't considered education outside of that forum. And even though I had taught a few little online classes, they were just more for the fun of it. I just wanted to teach some design stuff, and I love design, so it was great. So making the shift from just being a designer, and I say I love just being a designer. That actually was probably, ironically, still the most profitable business I currently own. So my design business, which is 16 years old, has the best margins in it, 95% margins. I have several platforms, and I make lot of money for doing very, very little. Okay. So
Mhm.
this secondary business, even though it's made a lot more money in terms of like overall, I have a huge team and we have lots of people working.
Right.
It's still in a lot of ways, margin wise, doesn't touch my design business, which is why I like teaching design. It really doesn't.
Right.
But it was the moment I joined a mastermind and I did find some community that I figured out, oh my gosh, there's this whole world over here that I did not understand. I didn't understand the way that you built a landing page to let people know about your deal. I didn't understand copy because I'm a designer. So I didn't understand words sell. Words totally sell, right?
Yeah.
I spent all my time on visuals. So it was like always visual for me for everything. But words sell. I also had to get out of my own way in terms of like, I only wanted to teach design. I didn't think in my head about building a community. And that happened by accident. So when I got into it, I was just like, you know what, I'm going to teach like design school. All these people will be in my classroom, basically online, and I'll just teach design and we'll do critiques and it'll be great. And they kept telling me things like, Carina, we'd love to have our own written community, not on Facebook. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I build it for them. And then 3 months later, they're like, hey, Carina, we'd like to see each other and like talk to each other. I'm just like, what? What do you want from me, guys? I'm just trying to teach you design. Yeah. Anyway, they now get meetings like once a month together to hang out and talk to each other. And we have some other ways to communicate. But what you don't realize is once you start something like this, it becomes completely out of your control. And my mindset was I was teaching design. Their mindset was that they were joining a community and hanging out with each other. And that was kind of tough, I'm going to say, because there becomes when you start knowing people's lives and you hear about their father passing away or the rough things that are going on, because they all share that stuff, suddenly you're entangled with 200 people's lives and you didn't even realize that you were going to be a part of that. And it's been a beautiful thing, but it's also been a scary thing. And it's also been a thing that we have to learn how to manage as a team.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying that was a interesting balance that you had to kind of learn along the way.
Yeah, I think it was a mindset shift because I didn't really want to do that. But guess what? That's what people pay for. That's what they want. They want to hang out with other humans.
Right. They want that community, that connection.
Yeah.
Truly.
We use community all the time. And I sometimes think people don't know what it means until they're actually part of a community where my people, oh my gosh, I remember the day when I found out several of them go on vacation together and
really?
Crazy stuff. I found out they all had their own Facebook groups where they would or Instagram chats where they would have mini groups where they would meet, and those that were close to each other would go to lunch together. It was just, and we have an international group, and I was like, what the heck is happening? They're like, we love this. This is what we want. And I honestly was like, oh, this is what community is. People, my team will tell you, there are people that are best friends now because of what we've built. And I love it. It's amazing. But I did not want it when I first started this. That was not how I got into it.
Right. That wasn't your expectation at all.
I came to teach design,
Yeah, right. That's good. I mean, you built something far greater than anticipated. Something definitely more beautiful. Mm-hmm. And, so I'm thinking here, you have this mindset going in of, I'm guessing, if you could take me through a little bit of the thought process here of how what were you thinking before you started seeing the returns on the fruits of your labor, during, and then after? For example, what was running through your head? Was there any mental blocks of how you were thinking? And then you started, every breakthrough was kind of, you saw more returns.
I think the first little bit, my number one thing was I don't want to get too close to these members because they're going to break my heart. It's going to feel hard. There's going to be some boundary issues. And the other thing was, I said, I'm going to teach you design and I'm going to teach you a little business, but like, I'm here to teach you design. Well, it turns out design is easy to teach. Business is harder. People don't understand what it takes to be profitable. They don't. And so all these meetings I was in always turned into like, someone would come on and she'd be like, I'm doing this. And I'm like, that's a terrible decision. Don't do that. They're like, why? And I'm like, well, because of this, this, and this. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. I'm like, yeah. So don't get it. I was going to say the number one thing, don't get into wedding invitations. Don't do it. Like, the things they want to get into. I'm like, don't do that. Like, that is a terrible market. They're like, why? And I'm like, well, it's a one-time purchase and then they have to word of mouth, tell a friend. So it's another one-time purchase. I'm like, get into something that's like one customer that loves you can buy 100 things of. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's like to me, strategic critical thinking, but like most people aren't thinking that way. They're just really excited to make the thing. They're just excited to make wedding invitations instead of being like, wait, is this going to make me money? And does this make sense? Right. And so once I started digging into everybody's stuff and just realized like the shambles that it was, I was just like, don't do this. Yes, do this. Stay on this course. Stay here for 6 months. Don't touch anything else. Here's how much product you need. And once you start like kind of digging into people's stuff like that, you start to realize, oh, like, this is what they actually need. This is the part that like they're struggling with. And if I can just help them a little bit with this part, it's more help than anybody's willing to give them. There's so many people out there selling design courses, but I started to realize it's because they all know how to teach design. It's because they don't know how to teach people how to critically think. The thing we always say in our program is we're going to teach you how to fish. We're not going to give you fish. We're going to teach you how to get your own fish, because at some point fabric not going to be popular. So it means you got to move on to something else. So you got to be good enough, smart enough designer to know when to pivot to the right thing.
Right. Now in this community, is there certain patterns you noticed were very frequent with people in terms of business mistakes?
Oh my gosh, the 3-month slump. Okay. Like that is like the number one thing. So we have our programs 1 year long. We have some people who do only 6 months, but almost inevitably the excitement wears off. And I think this happens in business in general. You see people, they're really super excited. They get into it. They keep going. 3 months in, they're burnt out and they're tired and they feel like they've done everything and they haven't seen any sales. They haven't made very much money. And so then they give up. The 3-month slump, I think, is real, not just for designers, but all businesses. And it's because there's not enough long-term thought process to get over that hump.
Yeah. It's interesting because I can often see and relate a lot of this business parallels to me doing the podcast, right? Even when I first started 3+ years ago, it was super exciting, super new. And then you keep doing this day in and day out. And it's just like, you don't see the growth because, as humans, we also like to see fast success. I mean, that's just natural. It's something you kind of have to train yourself to be patient for the returns and delayed gratification. But, you don't see you're putting in the work, but you don't see anything. And I think, I watched a lot of like Alex Hermosi and stuff, and he says like, it goes from naive optimism to like this sense of pessimism because it's like you don't see the growth, but then it's and then he calls it something like knowledgeable optimism or something, like after you've learned all the humps and now really how to grow the business or grow the show or whatever, then you have the right kind of optimism because you know what to do to actually make something successful. Kind of the same path of you with your other businesses. For this one, then you kind of like, hey, I already know the ropes here. Let's do this. So I think that's so interesting to see that it's what is like technically like just human nature.
Yeah, totally human nature. Hermosi has some great stories that fit in almost every company level. And I would say one of the things that's interesting that he'll say a story and I'm like, I don't get that because I'm not there yet. But then he'll say something that I'm like, and I remember that sucked, So I think the interesting thing about business is you try to give as much advice as you can, but it's really about experience. You have to like experience it to really see it. Let me tell you one story he said that I think is fantastic, and it applies to almost every business I have seen out there. And it also really matches with that slump that he talks about, or I talk about, is the 3-month slump. But we see a year slump. We see there's like several slumps, right? So one of the things he talked about is some gymnastics guy told him to do like some flyers. So he goes out and puts like 300 or 500 flyers out, and he says it doesn't work. The gymnastic guy comes to him and says, "Hey, how many flyers you put out?" He was like, "Oh, it didn't work. I didn't, it didn't work." And he was like, "Well, how many you put out?" And he was like, "What, 300 or 500? I can't remember what the number was." And the guy goes, "What? I do 5,000 on a test run." And what I find in business is that most people are not acclimated to the level they have to do in order to just do the test run. So of course the 3-month slump happens, or the 1-year slump happens, because the volume isn't there. And so they just think, oh, that didn't work. Instead of trying to figure out what that next level is before they have even moved on. So like most people don't know, like we give certain standards for our designers, and when we tell them to them, they're like, "Wait, what?" And we're like, "That is the information you didn't know. That is why everybody else is failing out there, because they all think they can make 5 products a month and they're going to be fine, when you've got to do X, Y, and Z. And it's so much higher than most people think it is."
Right. I think I've seen him at least refer to that type of story. I think he talks about like volume, right? Like you just have to do way more in volume,
and everybody's volume is lower than it should be. I had a designer come to one of my boot camps. So we do these design boot camps. That's the only way to come into my program, is you have to join a boot camp. And I had a designer send me a DM, and she said, "Hey, I watched your thing and I just feel like I've already made it, because, I have 200 products up at this one shop." I said, "Oh, so you're making 6 figures?" And she was like, "Well, no." And I was like, "Oh." And I didn't tell her, but I was just like, she was so proud of 200 products. She thought she was the bomb because of 200 products. And I went to look at that shop, and I knew that the number was actually 5,000 just to even get to the next level. 200 to 5,000, that's not even the same level. That's nowhere close. But that's where most people's brains are.
Right. It's all relative, right? 200 sounds like a lot, but it's relative to what you're looking at, right? Yeah. Even like the podcast, I think the statistic is most people don't get past 6 episodes.
Is that true? That seems so crazy.
Yeah, especially I think a lot started during the pandemic, and time and time again, a lot of podcasts quit around episode 6 just because the effort it takes to record, and mics and quality and editing is probably the biggest barrier. If not, hiring people is always a barrier, right? In any business, finances. But yeah, I think people don't realize the volume it takes, because everyone says, let's start a podcast. Let's sit down and just grab a couple mics, as if it's like a couple beers. And it's like, let's just grab a couple mics and just do this and we'll be good at it. Sure, you might be good at it, but that doesn't, quantify success. It's volume, dedication, hard work. But like we're talking about right now, volume. So it takes time to grow.
Totally volume. And what you're saying is interesting, because I think some of the best people in the world that would be amazing podcasters, right, or have made some amazing podcasts, but then don't continue to do it. It's the same in the design world. I am not the best designer, but I'm definitely the most consistent. And so what you'll see is that there are people who are way more talented out there who can't get their business off the ground. And it's just because they don't take care of all the things that are relevant, because I almost think that it's a crutch when you're really too talented. I see it all the time. People who are too talented, they think this is the thing that's going to carry them through. And it rarely is. Yeah.
And I've noticed even with myself, it's a lot of mindset too, and shattering some personal beliefs in order to jump. Even when I posted the first episode, I was having a lot of self-doubts of whether I should do this, how many people are going to see it, are people going to laugh, right? So it's like breaking these, I guess they're like kind of almost like an onion of obstacles within yourself. It's like trying to peel it so you can get to the next layer. But that's the hard part. I think sometimes when people are, too talented or too smart or too, whatever, good at what they do, they're too in their head also to actually kind of just breathe, let go, and jump.
Yeah, I do. I do think there is something there to be said about the mindset around, especially imposter syndrome, like when we're trying to do something new. I think we have to be really careful, because if we at least remind ourselves this is new, I'm not supposed to be good at it, that's really the methodology for getting past being new at something. I think for me specifically, I've been a designer for a very long time. Being a designer or a creative director is not hard for me. Being the CEO of a company, now that took a hot second. Like, I probably beat myself up for a good 6 months about who I really was, because I was having an identity shift. And that was really interesting, because I'm not really someone, I don't feel like I have tons of mindset stuff that I'm always battling. It's just not something. But I thought it was interesting that I was having an identity shift, because I really felt very strongly as a creative director and a designer. And to tell people I was a CEO was actually a really interesting shift. Once I made the shift, it was no problem. But I think everybody has a time period where you are making a shift, and you have to be okay with kind of delving into whatever it is, that new identity or that new thing that you're doing.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting that you say that there's probably a transition too, because when I first started this show, I had just dropped my path to becoming a doctor. I was about to go to medical school, and I was on my way. So that was and from a childhood age, I was very much wanting to be a doctor. So it was a huge identity shift of, well, what do I do now? And I had so much more time on my hands. I just wanted to try some new things, of things that interested me. And here I was starting a show. And I think that probably played in a bit too with this whole, like, who really am I to be on the mic? But then what it really kind of helped me was understanding that, well, this isn't really about me. This is about me. This is about my ability to help others by either deciphering stuff that I find or having guests on share their own experiences to help others. So once I kind of got that, it was a lot easier to remove this idea of imposter syndrome. And I think probably one of the keys to not having that is kind of seeing it past yourself. Like, this isn't just internal. It's not just about you or something. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's always the key, though, don't you? I think once you stop thinking about yourself, it stops being this horrible, scary thing. Once I realized, like, if I didn't become the CEO I was meant to be, that I was accountable for 18 people on a team and over 200 people in my program. And if I didn't not just play this part, but like actually step into it in the role I needed to be, I was actually doing harm to all of these people who are part of my world. And the only way to get them all where they needed to go was to just make the decision that this is who I was going to be and how I was going to take care of everybody else.
So was there ever a point in time you felt like if you needed a break that you were letting people down? Was that ever a thing?
Not necessarily, because I will admit I'm one of those people, and it's because I've been in business so long. Like, if I hadn't been in business for the last 16 years, I probably wouldn't feel this way. But I have always felt this way, especially about women. And because I stayed at home with my children as I ran my businesses. My children are a little bit older now, but like they were all tiny. When I was the creative director of Cardabella scrapbooking company, I was pregnant. So I was very pregnant. I literally had that baby in the middle of opening that company. I slept 2 hours a night. It was insane.
Gosh.
My life was super insane. Okay. And I had 2 other kids at the time. So it was just a crazy, my husband's an attorney. So he was gone a lot. I was basically a single mom, also running my business. And
the business is like a baby too.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like cuckoo. It was the super duper nuts. But
yeah,
I will say this. I have always, especially after that time period, I have always told myself that I am like an athlete. Athletes take good care of themselves. They sleep, they get massages, They work out. They are like, they take their medicine if they have to, they go to the doctor. They're always taking good care of themselves. And I was like, you know, at the time back then, and I don't know if it's still this way, but like Wall Street, like the people would like be excited because like they got very little sleep, or they had to sleep at the office and they were doing so many hours and that whole thing. And I don't know if that still exists, but I'm almost the opposite now, where I'm like, I need to be a primed athlete or a primed CEO for my company. What does that mean? If I need 9 hours of sleep, I get 9 hours of sleep. To be on my best, to make sure that I'm doing the best for my people, I have to be healthy. I have to be strong. I have to exercise. I have to drink lots of water. I have like this monster cup of water that's with me, and I drink all day long. Couple of times, you know, I fill it up a couple of times. So I just think I don't feel a lot of guilt. If anything, I feel guilty if I don't get enough rest, because I have to perform every day. Like, I'm teaching design, I'm teaching business, and you know, I want to be a positive influence, and the only way to do that is to be there for myself. It's so interesting, this whole thing, like self-care and stuff. I'm like, it's not even self-care. I'm just doing what a normal human should do.
Proper care.
I should sleep a certain number of hours. I should drink a certain amount. I should walk once in a while, you know, like I just do the things that make it so that I can have the energy to do what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely love that, because, you know, and it still kind of does exist today in a different form, less Wall Street, more, they kind of call it hustle culture. Mm-hmm. I think you'll see a lot of people push this like, oh, just keep grinding, work hard, work day in and day out, you know, sacrifice everything. Sacrifice, yes, is important to get to a certain level. You do have to sacrifice certain things, but sacrificing like the essentials, like you're talking about, is just creating more harm than good. And I always stress like balance is so important, because, you know, without your sleep and water and nutrition, all that catches up to you at some point. I mean, I even talked to a previous guest a few episodes back, and he was a very successful multi-7-figure entrepreneur, did great. But he said like he developed diabetes and health issues because he would go so long without like sleep and work into the night with coffee, and day in and day out, he just kept doing this, like working really hard, to the point where eventually his body caught up with him and he had to take a step back. And now he has to do a lot of, you know, care in order to fix himself, well, when he could have just, you know, taken the proper measures to do more of a marathon than a sprint.
Yeah. You know, what's so interesting about that is I will still say I've had a few health issues, and I have been doing all the right things. Like I sleep and I exercise, I run half marathons. Like but here's the thing. All it takes is the stress. And I will tell you the last 6 months or so, because my business has grown so fast, the stress alone has caused me health issues. So I can't even imagine also not getting sleep, spending a lot of time reliant on coffee or caffeine to keep you going, or any of these other things, because the business itself will carry so much stress for you that if you're not doing the proper stuff on top of everything else, the stress will take you totally down. Yeah. And I do want to say this, because I thought it was interesting. I agree, like the hustle culture, I don't love it. But I will also say there are seasons in your business where you will work more. Yeah. It will not be 40 hours. I wish that were the case, but it's not. Yeah. I will say that especially at the beginning of the business, you should be doing at least 40 hours if you're trying to really get it off the ground. I will admit that I will work generally a 50 or 60 hour week at the beginning of a business. Now, I'm 3 years into my business. I work a lot less than that. And when I say a lot less, like I don't work nearly the hours. And part of that is I read this great book called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell recently. Mm-hmm. And everything he was saying, I was like, yep, we're doing that. And then I was like, oh, we're not doing that. We're going to do that. And I just basically let my whole team know, these are the hours I want to work. And I don't want to work more than that. And I get it if none of you want to work more than that either. So like, how do we fix this? And so like, it started becoming a communication on our team about what we were trying to do and accomplish. And are we 100% there yet? No, but we're getting really close. And it's only been about 2 months where we've been kind of like, how do we keep decreasing the hours? Not just for me, but for anybody on the team who wants decreased hours, right?
Hmm. No, you have a couple great points. I think they're right. As much as we say balance, life will always throw you off balance for one reason or another, personal or business, and things happen. But, I think finding that rebound and kind of getting back to center over time is always important to remind yourself. And also, you mentioned stress, which is very true. I think a real key to anything that you want to do that's ambitious is your ability to handle that stress, right? So, like, for example, I could only imagine what, certain billionaires go through running crazy amounts of nonprofits and companies and new things, right? And like people just probably constantly bombarding them with ideas and questions and the things they juggle, but or at least on the way there.
I was gonna say on the way there. I think once you
Yeah.
hit, I actually am seeing this even now at where I am financially. I can totally see even at once we hit the 8-figure mark, I will do less. I will do less and less and less and less because I have the ability to hire a CEO to replace me. I have the ability to hire intelligent people who can take over certain pieces of the business. I actually think where I'm sitting right now has been the most stressful because we don't make enough for me to get the people involved who can see the business going to the next level. We'll get there. I'm not worried about it because we've gone so fast and we're trying to be very careful about this next year as we move forward. But I do think that there does come a point, and I see it with some of my friends who are doing 30 million, 50 million or so. There actually is less stress because they can take a little bit more of a backseat.
That's a good point. So you perhaps then the path getting there is the stress trying to handle that. The guest that I was referring to previously, something interesting was he said he started practicing a lot of Tai Chi and like Qigong, which is like, very good for stress. It's almost like a meditative yoga type martial arts practice. And that's very interesting that you mentioned stress because it seems to be that's the, leading indicator of anything, even if you're doing things right. So having some sort of practice that kind of helps you reduce that, even just walking or whatever, from time to time, even when you do have a lot on your plate, I think could really help with that stuff while you're on your way to getting less work.
All the craziness. I will say this for anyone who's starting a business right now, 0 to 100,000 was by far the hardest. Always 0 to 100,000. I don't know what it is about that zero. It's because it's like you haven't figured out how to run a business yet. The 0 to 100,000 was the hardest. Then I would say the next hardest was 250 to $1 million. But like everything above that, it hasn't been very hard. But we'll see. I had talked to someone who told me the next step up is that 10 million. That is the next hardest to like kind of hit. But I really believe it because now that I've done it, it is crazy how long I sat at 250 and it was very hard to get to the $1 million mark. Very, very hard, but not as hard as the 0 to 100,000. 0 to 100 was the hardest.
Right. And I've even heard, Alex Hermosi talk about these different levels of bottlenecks from getting to the next stage. And I know you just said you're not really sure what that bottleneck was, but do you have any idea as to why it's maybe the first part is, like you said, it's learning the ropes and some people probably have mindset stuff to get over as well as, you're just doing everything on your own. You're a one-man army almost.
Yeah. I mean, I did a lot on my own all the way up even to $1 million. It didn't take very many people to help me get to the $1 million mark. So I would say some of it is just understanding product because so many people think like they can take any kind of product out there and just turn it into a multi-million-dollar business. And I don't really think that's the case. I don't. I wish it was the case, but it just really isn't. You have to put things in place. Now, let me give an example in the design realm. As a single solopreneur designer, I could get up to 250 on my own pretty easily. Okay, so that's good. But I really struggled to get past that as a single designer. The only time I think I could have gotten past that is when I built a design agency and I had other designers working for me. And then we could get to the next like $500,000 mark or whatever. And so the problem is it's like about the product type because really at the end of the day, me as a single designer with my one products, that now I have some ideas about how I could do it now that I've run my other business. I'm like, oh wait, Carina, we could have done this and we didn't do that. We should have done this, right? So now I have some ideas about what we could do. But really, so much of it is just like you kind of get stuck because you're just doing the same things over and over again. And those activities literally aren't going to take you to the next level, but you just don't know what those activities are next. In design, I'm sorry, I'm giving lots of design examples. We have something called good, better, best. When you design the first thing you design, you think it's awesome. You think it's the best thing ever, but it's only because you haven't seen better and you definitely haven't seen best. But the moment you build the better thing, you're like, oh, that last thing I made, not very pretty. Why did I think that was so good? But you think the better thing is the best thing until you build the best thing. And they're like, oh, the better thing was just kind of so. And I thought that was awesome, right? I think that's the way it is in the South. Like as you're kind of moving up, you don't even know what the next level is supposed to look like. And so you're just spinning your wheels in this same little cycle until you do something to break that cycle. And for me, it was joining a mastermind. I had to join something where I could meet a lot of other people, see what they were doing in order to kind of like formulate in my head what it was that would take me to the next level.
Yeah, you have a few things here. One, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier. I do love graphic design and artwork and stuff. So I do kind of relate to what you're saying. And especially when I was first doing my podcast artwork and stuff, it was okay. I thought it was good. And then I got better. And now I'm like even better to the point where people will actually reach out to me and say like, hey, can you tell me like, or give me the number to your graphic designer? And I'm like, oh, wow, that's very sweet. That was me, so it's like, so I do see that ideology that you're talking about. And also I have a friend who's, very successful in business. And he always talks about when you're starting to just create the minimal viable product because you don't really know what the best is or what good is. And just getting started will help you get there to the better. So I think that's important, as well as you mentioned masterminds, which is incredible because I think that's something that's beautiful about that is they help you see sides of the same problem that you may not have seen before and maybe figure out what that bottleneck is or the bottleneck to what you need to actually kind of learn. Maybe it's marketing or maybe it was sales, right? Like where are you hitting that plateau or that ceiling to break it? I think that's pretty interesting too.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
It is just an evolution. Once again, that's that experience piece, right? So like, it's almost like you just got to go do something until you figure out it doesn't work. And then the next thing will probably like do a little bit better, maybe not work as well as you want. The next thing you do will do a lot better. And in some ways, I think one of the worst products you can do, and this was me for one of my businesses, it did well enough that it felt like dumb to quit. It made money. And we had people and we had a warehouse and we were doing, it felt irresponsible almost to quit, except for it wasn't making enough money to justify what I was doing. It wasn't a full-time salary the way I felt a CEO should get. And so you kind of play with those numbers for a long time. Like, is this worth continuing to do? Right. That's the hardest business to have.
Yeah. I mean, my friend, he had to consolidate some of his businesses because it just wasn't worth the channel of energy and time spent in that one area. So he's like, I should focus all my time and attention here. And I have all these things going on. So I did want to ask though, what numbers were you hitting before you joined that mastermind?
I was just at that 250 mark. Like I just stuck right there. Skyrocketed within like a year. Like I skyrocketed to the next level.
Would you have joined earlier if you knew about it? Or you think that was the right time?
Always hindsight, you think it's 2020, but the truth is I probably wasn't ready for it. I was still, and I still am once in a while. I sometimes grieve the amount of time I get to design. Because I used to design 40 hours a week, right? Now I design, if I'm lucky, 5 hours a week, right? I love design. And so I think it was the right amount of time because it was okay for me to move on at that point. I felt strongly that was the right time to move on. And and I still get to do the things I like the most. Like I'm still designing fabric lines. I'm still designing wallpaper.
Right.
But yeah, I think it was the right time. It was also, I will say, this was right after the pandemic when I started my program. And I think I also had some limiting beliefs and maybe limiting beliefs, but also some real things going on in that I didn't believe I could teach online the way I wanted to teach. And so
Mm,
COVID did a couple of things. It got everybody on Zoom. So everyone started becoming used to online. So it was much easier to start my program and have face-to-face contact and have people talk to me because they were all used to Zoom. And that changed the dynamic. So I think timing is everything when it comes to business, and just
right.
happened to be the right time in my right niche. There's no one else really doing it the way we're doing it. And really won't be doing it when we do the couple of things we're doing that's coming up that I can't even talk about. I wish I could. That's super secret. But like, it's honestly, I think timing is everything. And so for me, it was the right time.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, it's hard to tell, and only in hindsight can you really know that answer, right? So that's pretty interesting. I did have one more follow-up question to what you mentioned earlier, which was about a certain book that you had read. Now, I think the difficult thing about business books, from my understanding, is you don't know if it's applicable to you at that moment. That's the hard part, right? It's like there's so many good business books out there, but perhaps that mindset or that knowledge is meant for someone who's already at 7 figures or 8 figures or 500K, not someone who just started. So what are some books you recommend, at the starting level, maybe around the 6-figure mark?
Oh gosh, there are so many good ones.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think back to like my favorites. One of my favorites is so funny. I think it really helped actually in the beginning. It's called, I don't know the exact. It's by I think it'd be so good for your audience. It's the Story Brand books. And I believe it's Donald Miller. And he talks about, oh, that's a good one too. Okay, I have a couple. So the Story Brand book is awesome because what he does is basically situates your business in the story. So your customer is the hero and you are the guide. And the way he lays it out is so, in my mind, so easy, so quick for you to create copy and graphics and stuff that make your customer the winner of this whole thing. I think it's really brilliantly done. So Story Brand. You Are a Badass at Making Money by Jen Sincero. I think people don't believe in them. That's usually the first step. People don't believe they can make the money. And so if you can read a book like that and start being like, wait, I could make this money. I do think that that's really helpful for a lot of people. This is a great one, and it's a classic. Go for No by Richard Fenton. Have you heard of that one? It's
No.
basically a story, but his whole thing is that, people are going for yeses. So they're like, if I get 3 yeses this week on my sales, then I'm good to go. And so then they procrastinate their time. But instead, if you're like, no, I'm going to try to get 100 no's, you will make more sales and make more money because you're going for the opposite. It's a brilliantly done. It's a very quick read. I mean, like, I think it's a couple of hours listen to.
Yeah.
But I think that is a fantastic book.
That's a good mindset shift for volume, like we talked about.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's brilliant. And it's a really written, very easy. It's like a story, Building a Story Brand is what it's called by Donald Miller. It's not just Story Brand. It's Building a Story Brand. I think that's really brilliant. I think those are the ones. I am going to shout out the last book I just read. It might not be for all your people, but it might be because you're more mindset. If you guys are thinking about mindset, brilliant book. I just finished it yesterday called, it's Todd Herman, The Alter Ego Effect. You basically create for yourself an alter ego that you use so that you can step into whatever role you need to step into until it finally merges with you. He works specifically with Kobe Bryant on the Black Mamba. And he references like Beyonce's alter ego, which is Sasha something, I can't remember. But anyway, it's a very fascinating read. It's very in-depth. I just saw him speak at a conference and had a chat with him. He's brilliant. And lots of science behind this whole thing with alter ego effects. I think your people would really love it.
Yeah. I'm just curious, and don't answer this if it spoils anything, but is there like some sort of cue or ritual or something that like preps them into that mindset, I'm guessing?
So he has a couple of interesting things. It's more of a process is what I'm kind of coming to understand about it. So you kind of build, like you read it and then you kind of build this process until you find one or two people, depending if you, or animal, it could be even an animal, but you have to have a villain. You have to also have yourself and you have this alter ego. He's very into using physical things like glasses, like think the Clark Kent effect or something that you can touch or feel in order to get into this alter ego, which is very fascinating. He uses something at the end, and I cannot remember the exact name of it, but it's like basically a stomp, like the Hulk stomp to like get you back into mode. It's very it's fascinating. And more than anything, it should make you, for me at least, it made me really think hard about who I really wanted to be. And I'm pretty good at futuristic thinking, but this really took it to the next level for me. Like, who do I really, really want to be? And I really liked that because then if I could kind of shape that person, then I know with clarity what I'm moving towards.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I got to check that out. That sounds really interesting.
It's a great book. Yeah. The audio book, by the way, is fantastic. So
Sweet. And Carina, I have one last question for you on the show. It's, as you know, it's called Learn or Be Learned. So I always ask my guests, what is one life lesson that you have learned or that you've learned from someone else that you want the audience to know that you want to share?
I think one of the things you don't realize is that people around you are watching you and that you have to step it up. And I'm saying this because as I have run my design businesses, and I know lots of moms especially feel very guilty about running a business from home or trying to go after their own ambitions and goals. I have 3 children, 2 of them, one's a teenager, one just hit 20. And I will tell you that the more you go after your own stuff, the more your kids are likely to model you. My children say things I never would have said at the age of 16 or 18 or 20. And I have an 11-year-old as well. But like, I wouldn't have said things like, I'm going to be a New York Times bestselling author by the time I'm 24. Like, I would have never said that. But by simply modeling and going after your ambitions, your kids will realize and see that not only is it possible to do amazing things, but like you are showing them that it's important to go after things that you really want. And so I think that your example out there is far more important than you realize. And so you should be going after the things that you want, because if you're not, you're actually not being a great example, not just to your kids, but like your friends and your partner and the people around you. That self-doubt, I see it all the time. It's like self-doubt and imposter syndrome. It takes away all the joy of like what you really could do, what's really possible.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's an amazing closing message, is that, you know, not just others are watching you. I think also yourself, if you keep telling yourself, I should do this, and you don't, you're creating this feedback loop of you not even trusting your own, you know, your own intuition of what you really, or dreams of what you really want and like where you're going. And that distance is creating like a stronger gap in your own, you know, within yourself. And I think what you're saying is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, for being here.
You're so welcome.